Twitch is recording. Alrighty. Well, hi everyone. My name is Kevin Owocki. I am mostly known as the founder of Gitcoin, and I'm now running a regen venture studio called Super Modular. And this talk is about my journey going from founding Gitcoin, which has funded $50 million worth of public goods in the Ethereum ecosystem, to writing the GreenPill book, and just talking about GreenPill as a headless brand and this idea of regenerative crypto economics. How can we use crypto for good? So basically going from 2017 to 2021, founding and building Gitcoin, to realizing, oh, this could be a whole category of applications on the Ethereum blockchain, and trying to stimulate that movement by writing a book called GreenPilled, How Crypto Can Regenerate the World, and trying to stimulate a movement where we rotate capital and talent and resources from degen and just bigger decentralized casinos into more regenerative uses of crypto and Web3. So basically the foundation of why I think there's an opportunity here is that now we have a transparent, global, incorruptible, and programmable substrate for creating global coordination games. And that's my favorite smart contract platform is Ethereum. There are plenty of other really great ones. And I just think that these properties of being global means that it can be used anywhere. Transparent means that everyone has equal access to it. Incorruptible means that it can't be corrupted. You can't double spend. And the programmability is the thing that's the most interesting to me as someone who has a computer science degree, meaning how do we program our values into our money? If we value planetary regeneration and regeneration of our local communities, how can we program that into our money systems on blockchain-based systems? And so that's what I would define as the opportunity that blockchain has presented to us. And so when I think about my values and the movement that I wanted to stimulate right as I was coming out of founding Gitcoin and trying to think about doing something bigger, is a regenerative crypto economic system. So basically degeneration means that resource availability goes down over time, and regeneration means that resource availability goes up over time. And there's another aspect here, which is how does your system respond to shock events? If it is fragile, then it hits a shock event and then it goes down in resource availability. If it is anti-fragile, then it hits a shock event and it goes up over time. So think about the difference between FTX, which hit a shock event and went to zero, or UST, which hit a shock event and went to zero, or something like Ethereum, where when it gets congested, it just charges higher fees and the whole system kind of grows from there. So regenerative, anti-fragile economic systems is what I want to build. And I also think that it's really important that we define our goals in terms of not just financial resource availability, but looking at the 8 forms of capital: spiritual capital, cultural capital, experiential capital, intellectual capital, material capital, social capital, and living capital. I think are the things that I want to see regenerated in my local community, not just number go up, financial capital. So arguably the GreenPill Festival, which again, I wish I was there with y'all. I couldn't make it because of childcare related things, is experiential capital and probably intellectual capital. And depending on how much you're socializing in between hacking, maybe cultural and social capital as well. And then the third aspect of what I think we're shooting for, and again, I'm just one node in this network, you can shoot for other things. What I think regen crypto means is moving away from the Matthew effect, this graph on the left where wealth over time increases only for the rich and the poor get poorer, moving from a Matthew effect like system where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, to a system without the Matthew effect, or the Matthew effect is completely reversed. So basically the rich get richer, but the poor get richer over time too, is a system that I would like to build. So when I talk about regenerative crypto economics, I talk about number go up, not just financial capital, and number go up for everybody is how I define what I want to build. Those are my values that I want to build into the financial system. You can have differing values if you want to. I'm just one node in the network. And I think that we should, if you think about the future and the trajectory that we're on as of March of 2023, if our projected future is to continue just building decentralized casinos and a blockchain-based financial system that has frauds and rugs rampant, what would it look like to move to the adjacent plausible or possible future scenario, even if it's preposterous, that we use crypto to regenerate our communities and to regenerate our planets and to rebuild our financial, social, intellectual capital over time. So that is kind of what I set out to do when I wrote the GreenPill book. And so maybe let's talk for a couple minutes about how it could happen with crypto, and then I would love to break into Q&A from there. So I think the atomic building block of this movement is something called impact DAOs. So basically any Web3 project that creates a positive externality for the public, for people outside of the impact DAO. So I think a couple great examples of impact DAOs are Proof of Humanity, which exports a Sybil-resistant registry of humans to the world. Coordinate, which basically exports the ability to do peer-to-peer compensation to the world. And then Gitcoin DAO, which is exporting public goods funding to the world. So again, not being dogmatic about what type of capital and who it's exported to, impact DAOs, I think, are the foundational part of this movement. And what I think is really cool is how impact DAOs can stack on top of each other. I've seen this a lot at Gitcoin, where Gitcoin uses Proof of Humanity in order to create a Sybil-resistant registry and make Gitcoin work. There's implementation details to Gitcoin here, but basically Gitcoin benefits from the impact DAOs around it, and the impact DAOs around them benefit from Gitcoin. So there's a symbiosis between the public goods that we are being supported on Gitcoin and all the other public goods in the ecosystem. And if you have an ecosystem in which every project is exporting good to every other project, that is a super modular ecosystem. That's an ecosystem where 1 + 1 = 3, as opposed to a submodular ecosystem where 1 + 1 = 1.5 or less. So basically the idea is that these impact DAOs stack really well on top of each other. Inside of each impact DAO, there's a mechanism for distributing funding and distributing that good, and there is a funding source. So what I think is really amazing is the plurality of different mechanisms and funding sources that we've started to see in some of the impact DAOs that I've mentioned above. So Gitcoin Grants uses a mechanism called quadratic funding in order to distribute capital. Its funding source is grants, donations, NFT sales. Moloch DAO, which is one of the OG impact DAOs in the space, uses a mechanism called Rage Quit in order to manage the shared capital, and its funding source was donations, primarily the Ethereum Foundation and Consensus. So I won't go through all of these, but I think the plurality of mechanisms and funding sources is really important for the Web3 ecosystem, because plurality creates anti-fragility. If quadratic funding stops working, then at least we have the token engineering commons and optimism badge holders, and vice versa, at least we have quadratic funding. So that plurality in how we fund our public goods and how we regenerate our communities is what creates anti-fragility in them. And again, these impact DAOs stack on top of each other. So we've seen an anti-fragile ecosystem develop in which these impact DAOs are supporting each other. And is this movement that I think that we really want to stimulate, because if we can regenerate ourselves, our local communities, then at some point we'll be able to export those mechanisms, which are forkable open source mechanisms, not only to all of the digital world, but all of the world. So the mechanisms that we've pioneered in the blockchain-based ecosystem, I think we could start to use in our local communities and in our local city-states in order to regenerate public goods, and do it way faster and more efficient than I think that we could do before we had crypto. So we're at a point now in which the GreenPill book, which I wrote about a year ago, is turning into a global movement. So GreenPill is a headless brand. Any of you can fork the brand, use the graphics that we have created with GreenPill. And some early signs of what we're seeing here is that people are coming up with a GreenPill course, which is how do you regenerate crypto, local chapters. And then there's an opportunity to be a part of the movement by joining these initiatives. So, thank you to GreenPill India and to GreenPill China for their amazing support of this movement. The first thing I want to talk about is a GreenPill course, which is coming in the next couple of quarters. So basically, refi is not a mainstream topic of discussion yet, but once explained, people could understand why it could have a positive impact on their immediate surroundings. We could take case studies like quadratic funding and retroactive public goods funding, which have distributed millions of dollars of funding to the ecosystem, and make them more grokkable. we can make this into a collective effort. There are local chapters that are happening in cities across the world. I think that we have about a dozen that are going to be bootstrapped this summer. And so I've been working with Sijal and GreenPill India in order to make this effort happen. You can click that link down there at the bottom. I'll tweet the link so that you have access to it if you're interested in creating a chapter. And then, I recommend people, if they want to get caught up on the body of work that we've been creating around GreenPill, here's a free copy of the GreenPill book, a digital copy. You can scan it with your QR code reader. And I'll pass a link along to the organizers for anyone who misses the QR code. And I would also highly recommend checking out the GreenPill podcast, which is the QR code on the right. We've done about 100 episodes with the leaders in this space who are making it happen. So basically, how can we use crypto to regenerate the world? It's one part theory, one part action. On the podcast, we're just able to cover the people that are making it happen. So that's about all I had prepared for you. I hope the audio and the visual worked okay as I'm presenting halfway across the world from you all. Really amazing to see that the GreenPill Festival has started to build on top of the meme that the GreenPill meme. And I think that together we can build a movement that is greater than the sum of its parts. I want to build a channel for greater combinations of strength and intelligence to come together. And I'm just so happy. I'm just so elated that you all have decided to attend the GreenPill Festival. And I can't wait to see what is built coming out of the GreenPill Festival, coming out of the event. So thanks so much for having me. If we can facilitate it with AV, I'd love to do Q&A. And thanks again.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for that.
Yeah,
I think
thank you so much for having me.
The questions that we have from the virtual guests. So if any of you have any questions for Owocki, please drop it in the message box, or we will unmute. While we wait for that. Invite you guys.
If any.
What do you want me to say? Any of the virtual participants, if you have a question, you can raise your hands, or if you're feeling shy, you can drop it in this message.
I was going to say, speaking of the virtual participants, I just put a link to the book, to the podcast, and the form to create a chapter into the chat. So if we can get that distributed to everyone, that would be great. Go ahead, Rod.
Thank you so much.
Okay,
I want to say that you made a really great job. I'm a huge fan of Gitcoin. I think it's the best accelerator for Web3 public good project in the world. One question, how to invite you as a speaker to event to impact DAOs?
Yeah, would love to consider that. Just send me an email. I put my email into the chat right there. Thanks so much, Rod.
Okay, so I'll ask you to join one of Mundao AMA session.
Sounds great.
Do we have another question from the virtual participants? Okay, I think we have a bunch of questions here. The first is Josh.
Was that a question? If it was, I'm sorry, I didn't quite make it out.
Just coming down. Thank you. So one of the questions that comes to me around impact DAOs and making them interoperable is how?
I heard something about impact DAOs, but I didn't hear the second half of it. Would you mind repeating it, please?
The question is, how can you make impact DAOs interoperable?
Oh, how can we make impact DAOs interoperable? That is a really amazing question, especially since I commented on super modularity. How do we build an ecosystem where 1 + 1 = 3? In that each DAO has strategic complements with each other. My stack for making DAOs interoperable is, first you got to build social interop. So, invite me to your party, invite me to give a talk on your podcast. Let's hang out together. Up. I'm getting a little bit of feedback from Earthu. So first social interop, and then I think you want to have technology interop on top of that. So basically, do our APIs talk to each other? For example, Gitcoin derives Sybil resistance from Proof of Humanity, and Proof of Humanity is one of the projects that's been funded by Gitcoin. So there are two ways in which Gitcoin is interoperable with Proof of Humanity from a technology perspective. So social interop, technology interop, and then I think the third is economic interop. Is there a way that we can be financially supporting each other as we build this network of DAOs? And I'm a really big fan of this idea of a DAO of DAOs. Imagine an ecosystem of impact DAOs that are rising and falling together, and because they all like hold each other's tokens and they all share revenue with each other, what would it mean for us to create a mesh network of DAOs that kind of rise and fall together, a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing? So this idea of a DAO of DAOs that are all enmeshed with each other and interoperable socially, technologically, and economically with each other is really exciting to me. Really great question. Thank you.
Hi, Kevin. This is Prashant. My question was that ultimately now most of the public goods funding mechanisms that we have on Ethereum and on other chains, like their main source of funds is grants or foundation or like donations made. How do you think is it possible to be able to scale to the amount of finance that's required for delivering impact? Like, how do you think we can get other serious money to come into the game?
Yeah, really great question. I heard, how is it possible to scale the public goods funding that is going into the impact DAO space? That might be too reductionist, but was that mostly it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think that there's two things that we need to scale together. We need to scale the mechanisms for distributing the funding in a legitimate way, and we need to scale the funding source together. So basically, people actually think that public goods funding is about just raising money and giving it to public goods, but I actually think there's kind of like an impedance matching that has to happen between the mechanism that distributes it legitimately and the funding source that comes in. And so I recently gave this talk about how crypto can regenerate the world, in which we talked a little bit about this. And one of the things I'm really excited about is creating a pluralism of public goods funding mechanisms and public goods funding distribution mechanisms, and then funding the Ethereum ecosystem in that way with that pluralism of mechanisms, because that way your eggs aren't in one boat. So I think the base layer of the Ethereum ecosystem has retroactive public goods funding via Optimism and DAO drops. You've got quadratic funding via CLR Fund and Gitcoin, and you've got Giveth doing this give back mechanism, which I think is quite innovative. So first off, to answer your question, I think pluralism is really important. Let's not put all of our eggs in one basket. And then I think we want to bootstrap let's call it between half a dozen and a dozen distribution mechanisms and funding mechanisms for the ecosystem. So on distribution mechanisms, quadratic funding, give backs, dominance assurance contracts, retroactive public goods funding, I think are really promising mechanisms that can scale pretty well. And they each have their own limitations and things that they're good at. And so let's use them in a complementary way. But the real question is, how do we fund this stuff, right? And so, assume that we've got a perfectly legitimate mechanism for funding this stuff. Well, the obvious answer is donations, right? We can fund it with donations. Early Gitcoin was funded with donations, either from people who just wanted to do good or they wanted to build their brand, or they wanted to develop an ecosystem. Either way, it's a donation. And then we started doing NFT launches, where NFTs would be launched that funded public goods. We were involved in Gitcoin. What I'm saying but it was really Gitcoin. Gitcoin Presents was an NFT that launched that just recently raised $1 million for the matching pool. Moonshot Bots was another NFT collection that launched a few months ago that raised $3 million for public goods. And then I think that the real scalable mechanisms get interesting when you start to take taxes that we pay to our government and you start to redirect those into blockchain-based ways of supporting the public good. Arguably we could compete for those dollars or those rupees based off of the fact that we now have a transparent, immutable, low overhead way of distributing public goods to our citizens. And so hopefully governments will adopt this technology one day. But I think that until then, MEV rewards, sequencer fees on layer 2s is a nice, scalable, recurring, and legitimate way of funding our public goods. And so, yeah, the answer is I don't really know, but we've got a pluralistic ecosystem of experiments where people are kind of throwing a lot of spaghetti at the wall, and we'll see what they come back with. Really great question. Thank you. All right, let me know if we've got another question coming. I see some questions in the chat, I think. Earthu asked, how is it possible to scale the funding sources that came in the chat? I think that MEV and nation state taxes being redirected into impact DAOs are the most recurring and sustainable funding growth sources. Also, if your DAO can figure out how to make revenue, then that's really great. It's always nice to have revenue coming in the door. Go ahead. If you're talking, we can't hear it on remote. That might just be me.
Okay. I have a question for you. How does DAOs do 50 years?
Switch on the mic.
I will just, how does what DAOs do in 50 years?
The question was, how does DAOs something?
Can you please come closer to a camera? Because it looks like it comes from camera.
How does DAOs look in 50 years? Web3 moves so fast.
Ooh.
Just 1 year or 2 years. What about 50 years? What's up in 50 years? Thank you.
That is a really amazing and profoundly hard question. What do DAOs look like in 50 years? Well, DAOs are arguably 5 years old now, if you consider MakerDAO as the original DAO. If you consider 2019, 2020 as the hotbed of DAOs, then they're like 2 or 3 years old. And so it's really hard to predict with only 2 years of history what the future looks like, because hindsight's 2020 and it's impossible to see the future. But one parallel that I think is interesting is the evolution of the corporate form since the East India Company back in the 1800s to today, how it's evolved into all these different subtypes of organizations. We've now got companies, we've got nonprofit foundations, and we've got a lot of different types of companies. So I think the only prediction I can make with any reliability is that there will be several different types of DAOs, and some of them will just look like companies on the blockchain. Some of them will look like distributed networks, and I really can't say what DAOs look like in 50 years, but I'm hopeful that they're actually exporting good to humanity and that they're regenerative, and that's the world that I want to create. But really great question, really hard one though. Ben asked a question in the chat. I could answer that one, or I could go with whatever the live audience wants, whatever the MC wants.
We can go with the virtual question.
Okay, so Ben West asked, what projects growing out of Supermodular are you most excited about right now? So we recently dropped Biddlebox.io, which is a platform for doing hackathons. Basically, this is the people who are the brains behind Gitcoin hackathons have rebranded it to be called Biddlebox. So the idea is to make hackathons easy. So if you're hosting a hackathon or you want to get access to Gitcoin's well, it's not Gitcoin's network of hackers, if Biddlebox's network of hackers anymore, you can check out Biddlebox. Another project that I'm really excited about right now is Hypercerts, which basically reward impact with NFTs. So basically a new protocol for funding and rewarding positive impact basically, if you're an impact DAO that is working and exporting hypercerts to the world, if we can generate buy pressure for those hypercerts, then that's recurring income for people who are creating public goods. And one of the things that we're really excited about with hypercerts is that, as opposed to writing a bunch of grant applications and then going through grant interviews and then begging funders for dollars, you just have rewards that scale up with the amount of impact that you're creating, because you're issuing hyper certificates, you're issuing NFTs, and the more NFTs that you issue that are legitimate, the more funding that you get. So we think this is a pretty profound way of changing the way impact funding works. Hypercerts are just basically like, think of them as like carbon credits, but on any impact vector. You could say I funded, instead of just I took 10 I took 10 tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. You could say I fixed 10 potholes in my community. I helped 10 little old ladies cross the street. I funded 10 months of open source software. I funded 10 months of an AI alignment problem. So hypercerts are just NFTs that track impact, and the idea is to scale funding for impact with the amount of impact that you're having, not just with the amount of donors that you could kiss ass to. So those are two that I'm really excited about, Ben, hypercerts and BuildAbox. How do we envision finance flowing from the global north to the global south? That's a really great question. I think that basically what we need to do is we need to develop forkable open source code that can regenerate communities wherever they're deployed, and make sure that once they're working, that communities in the global south are aware of them, and that there's funding that's flowing into them. Really great question. Any tips for builders to potentially get funding via Gitcoin grants? Yeah, just keep an eye on gitcoin.co. Gitcoin is in, so I've disaffiliated from Gitcoin. I still hold GTC, but I'm no longer involved in leadership at the DAO. So I don't have any inside information about Gitcoin, but I do know that I'm getting a little bit of feedback. So basically, if you just keep an eye on gitcoin.co, they're releasing Allo protocol, which is the quadratic funding allocation protocol. Everything built on top of Gitcoin will be protocol based in the future. So they're in the middle of a metamorphosis, and I think they're about to announce their next round of quadratic funding rounds. So just keep an eye on the website for more info on that. Good questions. How did you manage the transition for Gitcoin to become a DAO? Oh man, I could spend the rest of the time on that. How do you turn a company into a DAO? Is like turning an apple into an orange. It's they're very quite different forms. A company is domiciled in a legal jurisdiction in a nation state, and a DAO is domiciled on the Ethereum blockchain, or whatever blockchain you choose to use. So there's a decentralization layer cake. Governance has to be decentralized. Computation and development of the product need to be decentralized. And then the economics, to the extent there are any, need to be decentralized. So basically the first step was launching GTC, the governance token and the governance structure for Gitcoin DAO, getting contributors that were contributing to Gitcoin DAO in the governance structure. And then the second phase was decentralizing the product. I built Gitcoin as a Web 2.5 product back in 2017 because we just didn't know any better back then. The tools weren't even there to make it decentralized. And so turning it from a Web 2.5 product into a Web 3 product has been a lot of the wood that we've had to chop over the last couple of years. And I say we as in the royal we. Again, there's hundreds of great contributors at Gitcoin DAO who are making it happen. And I'm mostly just a meme lord these days. And then I think the final form will be figuring out what Gitcoin's sustainable funding model for itself looks like. So the decentralization layer cake, again, is governance, development, computation, and then economics. So you just have to kind of work your way through that layer cake. So, and then I guess I'll just again say that the question is phrased, how do you manage the transition for Gitcoin to become a DAO? There's a certain amount that you just can't manage when you're not the CEO of something anymore. Like I'm not the CEO of Gitcoin. And so actually the people who are managing it becoming a DAO are the people who are on the other side of the DAO. And I just want to like give a shout out to them because they are really talented and able to handle the risk and the ambiguity that comes with learning governance as you go along. So snaps for the Gitcoin DAO contributors. Which are the hot refi topics right now? Are carbon credits too over-engineered? I don't really know. I know that what I'm excited about is decentralized identity. I'm excited about hypercerts. I'm excited about this thing called the meta crisis, which is a whole nother rabbit hole. And those are the primitives that I'm excited about right now. It feels like it, I don't want to be an arbiter of what's hot in refi and what's not, but you can see what I'm interested in if you follow the Green Pill podcast, which you can subscribe to at greenpill.party. Alrighty, more questions. I see more questions coming in from the chat than through the mic now.
Mic is not
Really
working.
kind of wish. Oh, go ahead.
Don't come here. Just speak here, guys. Yeah.
Hey, so I have a question specific to applications for climate. What's the infrastructure that is being used and what's the carbon footprint like? How does it compare to other alternatives? Because I believe like with having to ratify changes throughout the network, there's a huge footprint involved there. How are we planning on dealing with that? What are the alternatives? What are your thoughts on that?
Got it. Sorry, where is there a huge carbon impact in ratifying things on chain? I just didn't hear the question.
I'm not sure. So consensus protocols usually lead to a lot of processing happening, and Web3 has a huge carbon footprint compared to Web2. So going forward, since we're looking to build a regenerative infrastructure, how do we plan to deal with that aspect of it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that that's it. First off, that's a really great question. And I think that limiting the carbon impact of the space is something that the space should absolutely be doing. And so I think moving from proof of work to proof of stake, which uses, I have a proof of stake. Actually, I have a proof of stake miner behind me. You can see it right here. It uses less energy than a 100-watt light bulb out here, I think is a good first step, and that reduced Ethereum's energy usage by 99.99%. Sorry, 99.9%, not 99. And I think that that's a good start. And then I think using the chain and the coordination tools on Ethereum to regenerate the world is like the second step. So basically taking Web3 from being almost carbon neutral to being carbon positive is the direction that I would like to see. And so, how can we facilitate carbon capture and trading on chain in a more transparent, legitimate way than the legacy system can? And like, keep in mind, the legacy system, the legacy financial system uses a lot of energy also. And so I think moving to blockchains, especially proof of stake ones or non-proof of work ones, can be a strong way of moving that forward. But climate change scares the hell out of me, and it seems like we only have really less than a decade to figure it out. And so I hope to see a global shift of people to focus on carbon problems. It's a really important problem.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, Kevin.
Hello.
So,
Can you hear me?
right. There's a lot of
Young engineers here that are doing computer science.
they're about from 18 to 23 years old.
And what advice would you give them to get their career started in refi and Web3? What advice could you give to all these young engineers who are finishing school in 1 year to get into the ecosystem?
Totally. Great question. So I'm 37. I have a computer science degree from University of Delaware. in 2006. So I studied computer science growing up. I was a programmer, and been programming basically since I was 12 or 13. And when I look back on my career, and by the way, there's many ways to have a successful career, and so just know that I can only tell you about what I've learned in my specific life path, but just know that there's a pluralism of different paths that you could go. And I think a lot of your early 20s and your late teens is figuring out who you want to be and what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy. And so what I would recommend doing is going through what I call an OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, and then act. So basically, observe the world, orient yourself, figure out what you want to contribute to, decide what you want to do, and then actually fucking do something. And when I look back at my career, it's just been a lot of going through OODA loops and failing a freaking shit ton when I was first starting. But the thing that I would do is like, I learned pretty early on that I wasn't really afraid of failure. Like for me, failure was just a learning opportunity. And honestly, I wouldn't be sitting here with Gitcoin today if I hadn't just spun that OODA loop as much as possible. Before I started Gitcoin, I tried to start a VR company. I tried to start a machine learning cryptocurrency trading open source hedge fund, and I tried to start this basically what would have been a brave like bat competitor back in the day, and all of that shit failed, but no one cares at all that stuff failed, because it was the learnings from that got me to Gitcoin. So I would come up with an idea, I would orient myself, I would decide, and I would act, and then I would launch something and I would fail spectacularly, and then I would just spin through the loop again. And so I think that, like, as someone with a computer science degree, I can't tell you how lucky you are to be living in a world that's going digital at this time, and being a programmer or someone that's into computer science. You don't even need the degree, you just need to have the skills to build stuff. And so the world is really your oyster to try out building new projects, to learn new skills, and to see what you really like. There's a ton of opportunity for people like you to go through that OODA loop. And I'd say, it really depends on your risk tolerance. I know that there's people who are low risk, and they like to do things that are pretty stable, that make mom and dad happy, that they have a stable job. And then there's people who like higher risk activities, which is like, I'm going to quit my job and travel the world and start startups. You got to know what your risk tolerance is. What I did was I just worked a stable job, and I supported my family, and I was building Gitcoin nights and weekends. So, there's a way to do both if you have the energy levels to do both things. But yeah, going through that OODA loop is I think one of the most important things. You try things out, and you know that they're probably going to fail, but it's that upside of like finding the one thing that's really going to work, that is going to change your life forever. Like if I hadn't been going through that OODA loop and failing on all those projects, I wouldn't have found Gitcoin, and I wouldn't have found all of you and Regen Crypto. So it's just a matter of spinning that OODA loop. Really, really great question. So again, the OODA loop is observe, orient, decide, and act, and just do it a bunch of times. Throw a bunch of spaghetti at the wall, see what you like, what you don't like, break up, like double down on the winners and cut the losers, and just spin through the OODA loop is what I would do. Cool. Any more questions? I know that we're coming up on time very soon.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the chat. I think we'll end up at that.
Oh, there's questions in the chat. What license do I prefer, GPL or CCMIT like? I don't know. I've to be totally honest, I like when I start reading a license, I just like, it feels like I'm talking to a lawyer, and I just like, my eyes curl to the back of my head. Like, I don't know. I don't care. Like, I think if I worked in corporate America, I'd probably have to spend a lot of time haggling on my licenses. I used GPL v3 for all of the early Gitcoin stuff, because I just wanted it to be open source, and it felt like the most pure, like, free software society license out there. But I'm not an expert in licensing. It feels like Web3 and smart contracts are a new way of building permissioning of software. And I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but like it's always just felt to me like licenses were like the old legal system, and that I would always spend a lot of time on them, and it wouldn't be very fruitful. So I've just never spent a lot of time on licenses. Sorry. If you're making an MIT product, how to raise enough initial resources to just stay in your life, and unless you get a decent community. I've been focused on BD and want to jump into development, but I still can't afford it. Yeah, so I mean, I started as a developer and I built a lot of shit that no one needed back in the day because I wasn't talking to my customer. So you know, if you're a software engineer, I think partnering up with someone who can do business development, and if you're doing business development, partnering up with someone who can do software, those are very complementary skill sets. You probably need a product, like the ultimate for me, the ultimate founding team is like someone who's good at product and design, someone who's good at talking to customers and marketing, and then someone who's an engineer. And that for like a software team, I think is the ultimate founding team. And so I think that I think that you want to, if you're going to be a solo founder, you got to pick up all three skills and you got to balance those parts of your brain and figure out how to synthesize information across each of them. And yeah, it's really tough when you're first starting out and you don't have any capital. My strategy when I didn't have any capital, well, when I was in my early 20s, was just like, fuck it, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to go do this startup thing. And you know, whatever, my rent was like a fifth of what it is now. So who cares? I didn't have any expenses. Now that I have a wife and two kids and like a golden retriever and a mortgage, you have to figure out another source of income. And for me, that was working full time and nights and weekends working on my startup. So I think that it really just depends on your situation. And I just don't know how having an MIT license affects your ability to get initial resources. For me, what I think affects your ability to get traction is having customers and revenue coming in the door. And that's the biggest thing to optimize for when you're just starting out. If you can prove that you've got people who will pay $10 a month for your product and that you can scale that times 100 or 1,000, then I think you're sitting pretty. And so that's the case that's what I always aim for when I start a new product. Great question, Rod. Anyone else have questions?
No, I think we're good to go, Kevin.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for the time. I can't express how much my deep gratitude to the GreenPill Festival organizers for being a part of this movement, and to everyone who's there. I wish that I was there to hang out with you all for the next few days. Hackers are my people, and especially regen hackers are my people. So hopefully I'll see you at an upcoming event in the ecosystem. And until then, feel free to pick up the book, listen to the podcast. And if you're interested in starting a local chapter, would love to chat more. Thanks so much for having me. Peace and love.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I'm really signing out that I'm taking some things to do. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you all for being an amazing audience. Yeah.
Thank you.